Welcome to Purrfect Takes. I'm your host, Stephen Patton, joined as always by my dear friend and co-host, Jacob Acquire. We're finally here, Jacob. We are on the last division breakdown, which means we are a week away from the predictions episode, and more importantly, a week and 2 days away from the NFL kickoff. So this is pretty exciting. Everything's ramping up. It's feeling like football season. You can almost smell it in the air. It's a great feeling.
Oh, I've been waiting for this. That's all I got to say. And it is football season. We had football, college football this past weekend. It was week 0. We had a handful of games, like obviously week 0, only like 4 or 5 games were played. Only 4 FBS games were played. The big one being Florida State getting upset by Georgia Tech over in Ireland, where they played the kickoff. It was an interesting game. Number 10 Florida State, who should have been in the playoff, just got smacked by an unranked team. So it's always good to see. So we had college football, we have real football or professional football stuff going on this week. Today was cut down day, so everybody cut down to 53 players. Always kind of a rough day, like a so-so day, because one, you get your roster or initial roster set, but then 1,000 odd players are like fighting to stay in the NFL. So always an iffy day there. But we also got CeeDee Lamb finally signing a deal, or should I say the Cowboys finally acquiescing, capitulating, giving in to CeeDee Lamb's demands. And he ended up signing, it was a 136 over 4, so pretty close to Jefferson. That's what, $34 million per year. Jefferson got 35. To me, and I want to get your opinion on this, this was just another blunder by Jerry Jones. Obviously, it's good to retain CeeDee Lamb, but he just waits far too long, and everybody knows he's going to give in. And this cost him probably another $1 or $2 million per year that they could have saved on. I don't know. Your quarterback, your edge rusher that's coming up, who knows? But another Jerry Jones L to me. What are your thoughts on that?
For me, I think it was actually an improvement from Jerry Jones. I think it would have been smarter to obviously extend CeeDee Lamb earlier in the offseason, even last offseason. But typically from what we've seen, Jerry Jones would have waited a whole nother year until CeeDee Lamb's contract was up. So I feel like the analytics department, the way the front office is operating right now, they're extending their stars, which we talked about a few weeks ago. I feel like it's in their best interest to retain CeeDee Lamb and Micah Parsons and let Dak play out his deal. Let him prove that he's worth the big money that he claims he's worth. And this offense this year put it to the test with a lot of turnover on the offensive line, questionable receivers outside of CeeDee Lamb on that offense. And it's whether or not Dak can elevate that group. So I think overall, CeeDee Lamb got paid what he deserved. Jason Fitzgerald at Over the Cap talked about that this is definitely a contract that leans more in favor of the player, as obviously he is pushing kind of the market setting rate that Justin Jefferson did. A lot of his guarantees earlier on, the cash flows, I think he had a larger signing bonus than Jefferson. So a lot going for him in that department. And I'm happy for him. He deserves it. He's a great player in the NFL, coming off a 1,700-yard season in a year where he was neck and neck with Tyreek Hill for chasing that Triple Crown.
Yeah, for sure. I do think it favors CeeDee Lamb more than the Cowboys. Reportedly, one of the hangups was CeeDee Lamb wanted a shorter contract, like on top of it's because it's an extension. He still has his 5th year, I believe, to go. He wanted like a 3-year, whereas the Cowboys wanted a 5 or 6 year. I think back to the Tyron Smith deal that they made like almost a decade ago, which was a huge boon for them, right? Super long deal. They set the top of the market with him and then reaped the benefits as it went on. Obviously, CeeDee Lamb and his agent don't want to do that. You want to hit free agency as much as possible to like during your prime so you can get more money. So I think that was a win there for CeeDee Lamb. And obviously, it's a win to get signed as well, right? I didn't think he would approach the 35 number per year that Jefferson had set about a month ago, right, when he signed. I thought it would be closer to 33, like just getting over A.J. Brown, just getting over Amon-Ra, St. Brown with the Lions. But getting that 34 was certainly good for him. It's gonna be interesting what Jamar Chase and Brandon Ayuk command now, because I think Chase's representation has to say, all right, we're maybe slightly better than CeeDee Lamb. We got to go over him. And this is just going to leave a ton up in the air for Brandon Ayuk, who his college teammate Jaden Daniels suddenly has an extra need for a receiver after they traded Jahan Dotson away. it's really up in the air. I don't think either of them are going to get signed before the season. We were just talking about this before we started recording. What are your thoughts there?
The only way Ayuk gets traded before kind of the season starts is if it's like he gets traded to the Commanders and then they pay him. And that's really the only avenue I see Ayuk getting paid, because the 49ers have a much larger problem on their hands with Trent Williams holding out. And he's loving the offseason. He's playing golf. He's staying in shape. He's doing his thing. And he's, I think, made at this point, over $100 million throughout his kind of career in the NFL. And he's already got, I think, $75 million lined up over the next 3 years or something crazy like that, to where it's like he can make over $200 million in his career. He just wants more guaranteed money in the contract, because right now it's not guaranteed, and the team can move on from him or trade him if they feel like they can't afford him. So this is, I think, the bigger issue for San Francisco right now in regards to Chase. He's still a year behind CeeDee Lamb and Justin Jefferson in terms of when he came out of the draft. So I don't think the contract's going to go down this offseason. I think he gets paid next offseason. And this is why I think Jerry Jones and the Cowboys did the right thing, is if CeeDee Lamb came out and got another 1,700-yard year, him and Chase would really be pushing that $35+ million a year next year. And so Jerry Jones getting ahead of that, making sure he retained his star before he was asking above market rate, was a smart way to go about it. For the Bengals, they're probably going to end up paying Chase $36 million if he and Burrow stay healthy this year, because they're going to put up big numbers.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you kind of have to pay Chase, right? We'll see what happens with T. Higgins. The Bengals historically haven't been known as a spending franchise. Now that they have Burrow as their franchise QB, we'll have to see if that changes. But if they're going to stay stingy, I don't think they're going to keep all three. And T. Higgins is already on a franchise tag this year, so we'll have to see with him. But yeah, I think Chase will eclipse that $35 million mark, if only because next year it's going to be another round of receivers, right? Ayuk might be included in that because he's on his 5th year now, and he might get tagged and moved or whatever next offseason if he stays with the Niners now. And he's at practice. To your point, Trent Williams isn't at practice, and he knows that I don't have to do anything, because look at the splits with me and without me. Last year in the 3 games that they didn't have him, and granted Deebo Samuel, I believe, was also out those games, Brock Purdy did not look good at all. And I think we can both agree Purdy is not a superstar quarterback by any means. He needs to be insulated in that scheme. And when you don't have the best left tackle in football in that scheme, it's going to cause problems. So I do think the Niners need to deal with at least Trent Williams, and I do think they will get it done. You brought up like the Chris Jones stuff, I think before we were recording, like with the last year with the Chiefs. We saw it happen week 1 when they didn't have Chris Jones. It was a close game, but they should have beaten the Lions, I think. And so we'll just have to see there. I do think the Trent Williams stuff will get done, but I think it's finally time to move on to the division we've all been waiting for. And by we all, I mean probably just us and the rest of the NFC South fans, but I'm super excited. This is certainly my favorite division to talk about. And we have to start with the division winners last season, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Yeah, no, we're going to start with the Bucs, a team that actually paid one of their star wide receivers this offseason, Mike Evans. He got, I think, close to almost like a $15 million extension over like 2 years. So kind of averaging $25 million a year, and he rightfully deserves it. He's had 1,000 yards receiving every single year of his career. That's probably going to continue again this year, barring a major injury. And I think right now what the Buccaneers are doing is relatively smart to kind of the end of the season that they had last year. They stability. I am really messing up with words here.
It's one of those days.
It is. Stabilize the interior of that offensive line with drafting Graham Barton out of Duke. And that's huge. And I think when you look at the jump that Luke Hideki made in year 2, gives you hope that maybe their other interior guard that they drafted last year in Cody Mock out of, I believe it was Montana. It was one of those kind of like Midwest states.
North Dakota State.
North Dakota, not Montana. So again, like big hog Molly's in the middle. If he's able to take a step, you already have Tristan Wirfs, who is one of the best tackles. We were just talking about Trent Williams. Wirfs is up there in terms of just value added to a offensive line. And then add in the fact that they have so many weapons. They drafted Trey Palmer last year. They drafted Jaleel McMillan out of Washington this past year. And so those playmakers on offense paired with the fact that they bring in Liam Cohen, who has experience coaching Will Levis in his best season at Kentucky and working with Sean McVay in Los Angeles, you hope that some of those ideas are going to really open up Baker Mayfield to make bigger and better plays downfield like he was last year with Canales. So I think the offense will definitely miss some of the coaching staff pieces that they had with Brad Idzik, their offensive line coach that also came to Carolina, along with Dave Canales. But I think Liam Cohen is a good bridge for that offense as they try to repeat as division favorites.
Yeah, I'm with your initial points there. You talked about the value that Wirfs brings compared to Trent Williams. He just got signed this offseason too, so that's more fuel to the fire for the Williams conversation. The addition of Graham Barton, the center that they drafted, he can play everything, but I think he's going to play center in the league. I think that's going to go a long way toward helping the run game, because even with the offensive infrastructure they had last year with Canales and everybody you mentioned, their run game was not very good. And I don't want to put it all on Rachaad White because he got a ton of touches, a lot of carries, but that offensive line's run blocking was not his strength. And I think with Graham Barton there, with hopefully Gadecki and Cody Mock taking steps, we already know Tristan Wirfs is really good on the left side. Hopefully the run game can improve, be it Rachaad White, be it Bucky Irving, the rookie they drafted out of Oregon, who I think is a really shifty, explosive runner. That, to me, is the starting point for this offense improving this year. And you talked about Liam Cohen. I think Sean McVay is one of the better run minds in our league. I think when he had to really adjust his play style back following the, 2018 Super Bowl, I think he really mixed his run game up there. So I think Cohen can bring some of that. As far as the rest of the stuff goes, we talked about the rookies they drafted. They really just brought the band back together. Not a ton of big free agent signings. They bring Jordan Whitehead, the safety, in, and I believe he was in Tampa Bay before, and he was with the Jets, right? He was the guy who picked off Josh Allen three times in the opener, right? Shout out Alex, who we had on after that episode. But they bring him back. And that's about it, right? It's him and the rookies and some pieces along the margins. They didn't lose a ton either. Canales, Brad Idzik, they lose basically their whole offensive staff. But they also lose pieces on the defense. Shaq Barrett, who went to Miami and subsequently retired. Carlton Davis, who they traded to Detroit to hopefully be one of the starters there. And Devin White, who wasn't his best, the former first-round pick linebacker. But these are still starters along the defense that they don't have this year. I'm interested in what the defense can do to kind of support hopefully the growth of the offense, because this division shouldn't be we'll say a runaway for them anymore. I think they were kind of favored last year. This year, we should see the Falcons be a lot better. The Saints are still scrappy. Certainly the Panthers should improve from 2 wins last year. So I think the defense is going to be the tipping point for them this year, if they're going to try to continue or win the division again, like re-up with the division. I'm going to share, hopefully this is sharing the schedule now. Nope, it went away. But their schedule, because it was a first place schedule, is not super favorable for them. Obviously, they start off with the Commanders, but they're going to have to play teams like the Lions. They got to play the Niners. They're going to have to play a lot of the good teams in the NFC, and I'm not really sold on this defense, I guess, is the point I'm trying to make. The Chiefs, too. But we play the Chiefs as well. But they got a lot of work to do on that side of the ball, is the point I'm trying to make.
I like that they drafted Kalijah Kancey last year to pair with Vita Vea. I think that's a great 1-2 punch in your interior defensive line. But when you lose Devin White and Shaq Barrett as kind of outside linebackers, guys that are good getting after the quarterback when put in the right situation in a Todd Bowles blitz-heavy defense, that makes me a little bit worried about their second level. They also lost Carlton Davis in the secondary. And while they have some playmakers and Antonio Winfield in the back end, I don't see a lot of juice on this side. And this was a problem for them last year. They weren't a really great defense in a lot of terms, like the metrics. They were either average or below average in most. And so you go to the offensive side and they have an issue with running the ball. They're dead last in a lot of efficiency metrics running the ball. They draft Graham Barton. They grab Bucky Irving. They have a new philosophy on offense that hopefully is able to add some juice to that side. I don't see that same kind of addressing on the defense. And that concerns me, especially like when you said the Falcons, they added a lot of pieces. the Panthers are trying to come back from a 2-15 season. This isn't going to be a cakewalk like it was last year. After they started 4-7, this wasn't a team that was like ahead in the NFC South for most of the year. They had to claw their way back in and fight and rip it back from the Falcons and the Saints. So this is where I think it gets concerning for the Bucs. Did they get a little bit lucky down the stretch? Are they able to maintain it? Are they able to stay healthy? Because if they have some key injuries on defense and they get really depleted, I don't think this is a unit that's going to be able to stop anybody. And then that means your offense has to get in a shootout week in and week out. And that's a lot to put on Baker Mayfield's shoulders with a new offensive play caller. Yet again, it feels like every year he's been in the league, he has a new offensive play caller, but there's not consistency there. And you just wonder if that's going to impact him in a pivotal year where the team is trying to repeat as division title.
Yeah, for sure. And we talk about a new offensive coordinator. If Dave Canales is the QB savior that he's like being touted as, like with Geno and with him, I think it's going to be a big blow not to have him, not to have Brad Idzik, who I believe was the receivers coach, but had a big hand in the offensive meetings and stuff like that. So I really think this is going to be a tumultuous year, so to speak, for the Buccaneers. I think last offseason during our predictions episode, we talked about how Todd Bowles might be on the hot seat. I think they found some magic last year down the stretch like you're talking about, but I don't know if this team has the capacity to do that again this year. As far as ceiling and floor go, I could really see the Buccaneers taking a step back, right? It was 9 wins last year, which was just enough to win the division because I believe the Saints also had 9 wins, but they had tiebreakers. So I think quite a step back is what I'm looking at this year. Ceiling could certainly be 8-9 wins again. They have the core guys on offense, right? They brought back Mike Evans. They They extended Tristan Wirfs. They added some guys like Graham Barton and McMillan and Irving, the rookies, to infuse some talent into that offense. But this is just a case of bringing the band back together for me. And without the offensive infrastructure in terms of coaches and stuff like that in place, I don't think it's going to happen necessarily. You look at the thing you showed here, they are projected to show some regression as well as most teams in the division other than the Falcons. But I think it's going to be a ceiling of 8 to 9 wins and a floor of closer to 4 or 5 for me.
Yeah, the range for this team, it's very precarious. And like I said, it's going to depend on this team staying healthy, everything clicking on offense, and them being just a capable below average defense that they were last year to kind of repeat, because bringing the band back together doesn't always work. Players are a year older. There is turnover. And in this case, it's the coaching staff. And you just wonder if that's going to be too much of an impact for them to really put themselves ahead of a team like the Falcons that added a lot of different pieces and were only a couple wins away from winning last year. But a team that probably lost a little bit more, didn't really add a ton either, that was right there with the Buccaneers last year with 9 wins as well, were the New Orleans Saints. And what's interesting going down in the Bayou is they are in a situation where Mickey Loomis, who had previously was determined to just keep kicking the can down the field since about 2017, finally kind of stopped it this year. We didn't see structuring. We didn't see him trying to trade up and get his guy in the draft. It was just let the pieces fall as they could, grab a couple key veterans to kind of bolster both sides of the ball and hope for the best. And that's really kind of the situation that they're in. A lot of people think this is a team that could bottom out and really be a dumpster fire. I believe when it's looking at simply the odds, Dennis Allen is like one of the highest in terms of being first fired head coach. Like, this is a guy that is kind of on the hot seat, that if things do not break right, and if we were to look at their schedule, I believe like the first 6-7 weeks, like leading up to their bye, outside of the Panthers in week 1, I don't know if they're going to be favored in any of those games. And so if this is a team that drops to 1-6, 2-5, this is where you almost pack it in and go, okay, the Saints may fire their coach in season, and then they turn to a guy like Spencer Rattler. Because for those of you watching on YouTube, their schedule goes, they play us week 1, then they play the Eagles, the Chiefs, the Broncos. No, I think I'm going the wrong way. Oh, it's going back and forth. So it's Saints, Cowboys, Eagles, Falcons, Chiefs, Buccaneers, then the Broncos. And it's like those first 6 games, like you could be 2-5 two, like, I don't know where you see them falling, but the Broncos and the Panthers are the only two I could see them being favored in within the first 7 weeks.
Yeah. So with the Saints, I'm going to be a bit more negative, I think, and hopefully it isn't just me being a Saints hater or anything. But I can't believe some of the grace that other NFL podcasters or media are affording them this year. I think they've lost a lot of good things. I think they're only getting older. You talked about how Mickey Loomis isn't up to his antics. He can't be. Like if you're thinking of like Sisyphus pushing the boulder back up the hill, the boulder's been sliding down for years now. Like he's finally, I guess, sitting there and caught it and like refusing to push it up. And that's what has to happen because this team is just not good anymore. Looking at the offense, Derek Carr, just not good last year. I think we can agree with that.
The only saving grace about Derek Carr is because he played super conservative. There weren't a lot of mistakes on that side of the ball,
which is fair.
Sacks or turnovers, and that sometimes is more detrimental than making the big explosive plays, even though the explosive plays are what lead to wins and points. So I get that knock about Carr, but him protecting the ball is a huge aspect, especially when you look at the hog mollies up front or lack of.
Well, and that was my point, right? Doesn't take a ton of sacks, doesn't turn the ball over. I think last year the offensive line was at least stable. I wouldn't say it was good. This year it's not stable, right? We have Trevor Penning, who was their first-round pick the same year Icky was drafted, so 2 or 3 years ago now. Left tackle, they move him to the right side. They draft Talize Fuanga from Oregon State, who played right tackle in Oregon State, and move him to the left side. Both of these guys are not good pass blockers. Fuanga in college was billed as like a good run blocker. To his credit, he really is, like showing some of his stuff here now. But in the preseason, they both look really, really bad there. The rest of their O-line, I think, is solid. Or as far as McCoy and Cesar Ruiz, I think are solid. But I'm not even sure who's going to play the other guard spot. I think Chris Olave is really good. You know, I have a lot of stocks on Chris Olave, but he and Derek Carr just didn't seem to have a connection last year as far as down the field and getting some of those big plays there. So I'm not sure how that's going to work. Rashid Shaheed is a really cool gadget player. I think he could be a wide receiver too in the league, but I don't think we've seen enough there. I don't see it with the offense. And then on defense, they've just gotten older and older. The trenches aren't the same as what they used to be. I guess you could say Demario Davis is still probably their best player, but he's going to be 36 this year. Marshawn Lattimore hasn't been like fully healthy since 2021. It's just, I feel like the team is built on like toothpicks, I guess. Back in, I think it was middle school, we had to do a project where we stuck toothpicks in Jell-O and we had to build like an earthquake-proof building or whatever. And that to me is how this team is, right? It's a bunch of toothpicks, and as soon as one goes down, the whole thing is just going to collapse to me. Look at the schedule like you're talking about. I actually, and this is kind of jumping the gun to next week's take, but I actually like the Panthers in that game. And then it just only gets worse from there until they get some respite with the Broncos. The Broncos could be good too. Sean Payton was able to do some good things with Russ there last year. So who knows? I just do not see it with the Saints, and they didn't bring a ton in to help either. Their big offseason additions, looking at the notes, they did bring in Chase Young to presumably start opposite Cam Jordan because their first-round draft picks along the defensive front have not shown great returns over the past couple of years. Bring in Willie Gay from the Chiefs, the linebacker, to replace Zach Bond. But they also lost Ryan Ramczyk for the year due to his injury. I think it was blood clots at the start of the year. Jameis Winston, who if Derek Carr's going to be a starter, that's fine. But Jameis was a very good backup. I think he, when we talked about the AFC North, I think he's going to be one of the important pieces for the Browns there when he inevitably replaces Deshaun Watson. Marcus May, Zach Bond on the defensive end, Andrews Pete, who is still out there. So for interior help, they could go back to him. Then Michael Thomas, who isn't the same as he used to be, but that's still one of the old guard big names that they lose as well. For me, I just don't see it. Their offseason, they've had to do this, right? You talked about it. They had to take their medicine. But to me, as far as like going towards the future, I don't see it either. Spencer Rattler has to be really good or really fun, at least, for them to salvage the season to me. But for me, when we get into, after you do your spill on the Saints, when we get into ceiling and floor, their floor is going to be pretty low for me.
I think the floor, because of the offensive line issues, because of it being an aging roster with a lot of old guys where it is that toothpick experiment. I'm shocked you guys use Jello. I think we did marshmallows back in my middle school projects.
It was Jello as the base to make it shakier, but you connected them with marshmallows.
Yep. Okay. Now we're on the same page. Now I'm flowing. But with the Saints, I think a lot is getting focused on the offense and the offensive line. I like Chris Olave. I like Rashid Shaheed. I like A.T. Perry. They have some intriguing pieces in Jawan Johnson and Taysom Hill that they use to kind of get some 12 and 21 personnel looks. And I think having that diversity, bringing in a Shanahan-style play caller and Clint Kubiak, we've seen a lot of Shanahan offenses not prioritize the offensive line. And because they're able to get their quarterbacks off platform with different play actions or boots, that you can allow your best pass blockers to be the one that's in front of your quarterback. And this is where I think they're doing themselves a disservice with starting Fuaga at the left tackle spot. You know, Penning's a lost cause. He's not the player that you touted him to be when you drafted him in the first round. Keep him at left tackle. If he's abysmal, you get the backup in there. Maybe you get somebody mid-season, but you should really have Fuaga where he naturally played in college, because I think he would learn and grow a lot better at that right tackle spot, especially when he's right next to Cesar Ruiz and Eric McCoy. And Andres Pete probably hasn't been picked up because of like different injuries he's had over the course of his career and not being 100%. But if they were to bring him back and slot him at left guard, I feel a lot more confident about that offensive line than I do at the moment. Unfortunately, that's just not the way they're approaching it. I do believe Clint Kubiak is going to open up this offense to take more shots downfield off of play action, and they have the playmakers to do that. So I'm very curious to see how they handle the offense. But on the defense, until they prove otherwise, this was a top 5 unit last year with these aging guys. I think Willie Gay is an upgrade to Zach Bond on the defense. I mean, Zach Bond, he was a good key contributor. I believe he played less than 20% of the snaps last year. He wasn't super impactful from a defensive side. Then Brian Brisset and Isaiah Foskey, who are 2 guys you drafted last year. Foskey really hasn't come into his own, but Brisset looks good. You add in the fact that you have Chase Young opposite Cam Jordan. It is mostly the same defensive line you had last year. And then on the back end, you had Kool-Aid McKinstry. So if you have a guy like Marshawn Lattimore go out for the season, you have him and Alontae Taylor back there that I feel like they are capable enough cornerbacks where they aren't going to get burned every single play. With that in mind, and Dennis Allen being the head coach, I think the defense is what's going to keep them in games. And as long as their offensive line does not completely derail the offense, I think this team has a chance to do what it has done for about the past half decade, and that's be a 500 team. So while I think the floor is really, really bad, I do believe this is a team that's still going to hover in that range because of the talent they have on both sides of the ball, and more specifically, how good that defense is and how much credit we really aren't giving them.
So as far as we'll start with the defense, because that's what you finished with. I am just not as high on some of the ancillary secondary pieces compared to you. Obviously, I like Kool-Aid. I watch a ton of Alabama games. Wasn't as big on him as I was on Arnold or Quinyon Mitchell, who were like the top tier corners in this class. But
he was in tier 2 though for you.
He was for sure. I kind of wanted him on the Panthers, but they went a different route. My point being that I think Paulson Adebo, Alontae Taylor, some of the other corners you talked about, and Kool-Aid McKinstry, I think we'll be fine. Kool-Aid for this year because he's a rookie. I think we'll be fine sparingly. I just don't trust any of them to play a ton on the outside this season. Hopefully Lattimore is able to stay healthy. And their safeties as well. They still have Tyrann Mathieu, who's probably close to 50 now. He's getting up there. I'm joking, but they lose Marcus May. Willie Gay, I do think, is an upgrade over Zach Bond, but he was probably the worst of the Chiefs' strong linebacking core. They're willing to let him go, whereas they re-signed Drew Tranquill this offseason there. And then their defensive front, Cam Jordan is still, until he's not really, really super strong, he's still a good pressure getter, right? His pressure to sack rate is pretty good for him as well, but not a fan of their interior. Brian Brisset, we'll have to see. He did look decent in the preseason, but did not get a ton of run last year. And when he did, wasn't super, super impressive to me. And then if Chase Young is going to start, hopefully, I really hope he rushes against Taylor Moton because we shouldn't hear his name called the entire broadcast. If that's the case, then we get to the offensive side of the ball. And this is where my big concerns lie. You talked about other Shanahan schemes being able to get their best blockers in front of them and operate in heavy play action motion, that kind of thing. Number one, I'm not sure that the Saints weapons are good. Like, they have the ability to go into motion and things like that, like the 49ers do with Tyreek Hill and Waddle, the Dolphins do, and then the Niners do with some of their guys. Number two, Derek Carr isn't as mobile as Purdy or Tua. Granted, like Tua, he's taken a lot of hits throughout his career, but he still knows how to move around. And Derek Carr doesn't get the ball out nearly as quickly as Tua does. So my concern with the Shanahan style.
What did we see with Shanahan in 2016 when he had Matt Ryan? Matt Ryan didn't want to do all this bootleg kind of weird, funky stuff that got him out moving. But when you can have 6-7 man protections, give yourself a few seconds to allow the wide receivers to get downfield, that's what opens up the big playability. And I think Carr will buy into that if Clint Kubiak installed this offense properly. And
my rebuttal to that would be, who here is even close to 2016 Julio Jones? Or the run
fair.
game.
That's
We haven't talked about the run game yet, where Alvin Kamara is also approaching 50, like Tyrann Mathieu. Jamal Williams did not impress at all last year. That 2016 Falcons game had Devonta Freeman and Tevin Coleman, who were both disgusting that year, right?
Yeah.
So they were able to churn on the ground and get the big plays in the air. I don't think the Saints have that in either respect. And then if they did do the patchwork with the offensive line like you're talking about, maybe I wouldn't think that they were bottom 5, but sadly that this is the case. And until proven otherwise, I'm just going to be super, super low on that O-line. Ceiling, yeah, I could see 7 wins maybe, just because Dennis Allen and the Saints have been able to do that over the past couple of years. When we had Tage on for the NFC North pod, I brought up the stat, or really just a fact, that it was the Chiefs, the Steelers, the Bills, the Vikings, and the Saints had all won 7 games the past 5 years. So I could see that happening if they make it work. But as far as floor goes, I'm looking at like number 1 pick territory. I think if we're talking about the toothpick thing, it's more likely that some of those toothpicks snap than everything goes into place when you shake the table there. And I really don't see it with him this year. And we have a couple Saints friends who are fans. I can't. My rant's getting towards the end there. I'm getting towards the end of my rant here, but for their sake, actually, I don't hope that they're good for their sake because I hate the Saints, but I just do not see it with them. And I think we're going to be looking at Spencer Rattler, who's one of your favorite players in the draft. I think we're going to be seeing him by the time like halfway through the season. I do think, like we're talking about, Dennis Allen will be one of the head coaches let go during this season or at the max at the end of the season. I just don't see it with the Saints this year. And to your point, for the future, you talked about how Mickey Loomis didn't pull his antics as far as pushing money into the future. I do think that's a good thing going forward if Rattler's able to work. If let's say they get the number 1 pick and they want to take Carson Beck out of Georgia or Jalen Miller out of Alabama. We'll talk more about colleges once the season starts because college season's starting and we need to cover that a little bit. But for the future, I think there's stuff in place. For now, I just think they just got to take their medicine and have a really bad season this year.
Well, I will say this, that top 5 pick is definitely a huge portion of where a season could land. And that would be detrimental, obviously, from a standpoint of you want to win as a team. But moving forward, if you get Spencer Rattler for half a season, if he looks good in this offense, maybe you're able to bring in somebody that pairs well with Clint Kubiak or another Shanahan mind like a Bobby Slowick as your head coach. So it's a seamless transition. And if Rattler showed enough, there's some really good that if they in the top 5, you pair somebody like that with Chris Olave, you build the offensive line through free agency and the draft, all of a sudden you're back right in the hunt with the NFC South. So I think there are pieces in place that even if things hit the fan, they still have a lot of core pieces to kind of build upon moving forward. And with them not kicking kind of cash and cap down the line, they're putting themselves in a position to be very active in free agency. And this ownership group and front office has shown they are not afraid to spend money. So that I think is in their favor moving forward. However, for 2024, it does look bleak. If your ceiling is like 500, maybe play for the division title, and kind of the floor is being a bottom 5 team. So it's not looking good for the Saints, who finished with 9 wins last year. The team that is trying to make the climb, that finished third in the division, that we're trying to sell us that Desmond Ridder was the next best thing since sliced bread, and was
by the way, got cut today from the Cardinals.
It's interesting that Desmond Ridder, Rondale Moore trade. Rondale Moore, I believe, has a season-ending injury, which was very traumatic. It was awful that he had to get airlifted. But then, Desmond Ridder gets cut. So it's like they traded for players that aren't even going to be impactful this year, which is kind of crazy. But the Desmond Ridder situation didn't work. Arthur Smith got canned. They bring in a technically former coach in Raheem Morris, who was an interim for them back, I think, when Dan Quinn got fired back in, I think it was 2018.
2018, yeah.
Yep. So he has experience with that ownership group. He brings in, I think it's Zach
Robinson, I believe.
Zach Robinson from Los Angeles to be the offensive coordinator. You sign Kirk Cousins. You draft Michael Penix in the top 10. You add a couple playmakers on offense in Darnell Mooney. You hope that offensive line that's homegrown is able to pave kind of big gaping holes for Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier. I think for me, where you have issues with kind of like the Saints on the offensive line, the Bucs on the defense, it goes kind of back to the Bucs. I'm a little bit concerned about this Atlanta Falcons defense. And I know they signed a lot of big names. They traded for some big names. I'm not sold. And are you sold on that unit being capable enough to not only help them win the NFC South, but be competitive in the NFC?
I am sold on the Falcons, we'll say. I am not sold on that defense. I am with you. Now, they did trade for, Matthew Judon from the Patriots. I believe it was a third-round pick they sent to the Patriots. Kind of the Patriots are hoping it's like a reverse Mohamed Sanu situation there. And then I believe the day after they signed Justin Simmons, the former All-Pro safety who is getting up there in age, but certainly can still play. I think they definitely have the best safety duo in the NFC now between Jesse Bates and Justin Simmons there. But I'm with you. The rest of the defense is just not there for me, right? I'm not even looking at the depth chart. I'm just going to try to think and name them, right? You have the two safeties, AJ Terrell, who's a pretty good corner. He's kind of off and on. He did get extended. Pretty big number, right? I think he was 21.
Like 81 over 4. It was like something like that.
I can't tell you who the other starting corner is. I think it'll be Clark Phillips, the sophomore player from Utah, who was really good last year, but is quite a bit of a smaller corner. The linebackers, not sure. They did trade for Matthew Judon, but you talk about an old front now. It's going to be Judon and Grady Jarrett.
Yep.
They did get rid of Calais Campbell and Bud Dupree, who are on the older end, but those were their top 2 pressure getters last year. So a good bit of turnover there. And then they're going to be relying on fringe guys like Arnold Ebiketie, who they drafted 2 or 3 years ago now to be that other guy, situational rusher.
They have David Onyemata still from last year that they signed.
That's true.
That's
from
an
the
interior
Saints.
presence. Yep.
Yeah. They also lose Ryan Nielsen, who this defense was not by any metric very good last year. But I thought Ryan Nielsen did a standout job. He kept them from being 32nd, in my opinion. And they're going to replace him with Jimmy Lake, I believe, is the new defensive coordinator. I assume Raheem Morris is going to have his hand in that room since he did just come from the Rams, where he was the defensive coordinator there. Did a magnificent job. We've talked on at length at the job he did there last year. But I am not sold on the defense being able to compete in the NFC or in the playoffs. I guess it's the important games as they move forward, because I do think that they have a good shot to win this division. The offense, however, I think should be much, much improved with Kirk Cousins. He's going to be in a system that might be similar to what he saw in Minnesota, given that Kevin O'Connell was a Sean McVay disciple, and Zach Robinson is now coming from the Rams under Sean McVay. Maybe we see some similar stuff there, but if he's good and healthy, granted he is going to be 36, 37 this year, coming off an Achilles, similar to a Rodgers situation. He has really good skill position players, right? Drake London, I think, should feast this year. If you're a fantasy football player, he should be looking at a lot of targets. Bijan Robinson, you know how high I am on him. Tyler Algier is a good thumper down the middle. And we'll see if they can revive Kyle Pitts this year. This is going to be the closest thing since Pitts' rookie year to stable quarterback play, we hope, where Pitts lit the league on fire in terms of yards. He had 1,000 yards, but I think only one touchdown, and it was in London because he didn't have any domestic touchdowns that year. It was just the foreign touchdown. But if they can return him to what he was, have Drake London make some plays, Bijan and Algier. They bring in Darnell Mooney as well, who I think could be a good number 2 for them. In the grand scheme of things, he's going to be like the 4th option maybe because the other guys are so good. But I think he'll be a good secondary piece for them in the receiver room. The offensive line does give me a little bit of concern. Last year, I thought they were about average. Going into the year, I had much higher expectations for them, given that they had extended a couple of the pieces. And I think the lone person they didn't have there from the year prior was Drew Dahlman, and he came in and did a decent job. But I am a bit concerned there for them this year because Kirk Cousins is not going to be mobile. He's getting up there. He is coming off a leg injury. So hopefully they're able to stay up front and protect him for Kirk Cousins' sake. But maybe for the Falcons' sake, they do want to see some of what Michael Penix can do, who they drafted at 8th overall after giving Kirk Cousins, what was it, $136 million in free agency, close to 100 or a little over 100 guaranteed. That still sticks with me as what are we doing here? Because the Falcons brass and some of their fans are going to point to the Jordan Love situation, right? The Patrick Mahomes situation. You even talked about this in an article you did recently going over, well, it was the GM article, correct?
Yeah,
with their
it's the NFL trade market. Is that there are teams like this that, exactly like you said, that they have a starting incumbent quarterback that is considered at least average or a little bit better, and they're going after another quarterback. And so that's apparently what Terry Fontenot's trying to do. You brought up the offensive line. I didn't think they performed as well as they should have last year. This is a team where the general manager said, we don't plan on picking in the top 10 again for a while. Like, you can't really see that when it hasn't culminated and you're just banking on these players who haven't played a snap for you to be something special. When we've seen Russell Wilson, when we've seen Deshaun Watson, when we've seen Matt Ryan and some of these aging veterans leave to another town, they do not pick up where they left off. It's a complete fall off. So then if that is the case with Cousins, you just spent all this money, like you said, over $100 million in guaranteed money for a guy that's going to add very little value to your team. And then that means you're counting on a rookie who is extremely old, but also has an injury history. So it's just, that could become a very weird carousel if things do not work right for the Falcons this year.
Yeah, and that was kind of the point I was trying to make, referencing your article. The teams that we're talking about, the Chiefs, who had Alex Smith in place, the Packers, who had MVP Aaron Rodgers in place, those were like good, stable organizations, right? Like we're talking about with the Packers, they didn't need Jordan Love for 3 years. Yep. Maybe they could have used him in that last Rodgers year when they went 8-9, but prior to that, they were making NFC championships. Rodgers was at an MVP level. I think LaFleur had 3 straight 13-win seasons to start off his tenure there. The Chiefs.
Reed and exactly.
Andy
Reid, they were in the
Reid,
divisional round all the time.
Yeah. Andy Reid, who when we went over the coaches list, never had less than 10 wins with the Chiefs, except back in 2013 when they had the first overall pick. Up until then, really solid there. You can look at other examples throughout NFL history, but this is an aging quarterback that we're talking about who now has an injury history. And then an aging rookie we'll talk about. He was in college for 6 years. One of those years was the COVID year. He had 4 season-ending injuries at Indiana before he went over to Washington. He's going to be on the older side too. And I get the idea of wanting to have your guy long-term. If you have conviction on him and you think he's the quarterback of the future, sure. But you also gave a QB a 4-year deal, spent a ton on him. And then when you were a team that should be the favorite to win the division and go into the playoffs, compete in the playoffs, and you have the 8th overall pick, a top 10 pick, and don't spend it somewhere else that could immediately help your team, that to me just reeks of incompetence. You mentioned, he said, we're not picking in the top 10 again. You know who else said that? A GM who said that recently? One Scott Fitterer said that when we drafted Bryce Young, and he's no longer the GM of the Carolina Panthers. So sometimes it doesn't work out the way you want it to or you think it's going to. And I could really see that happening for the Falcons like we're talking about. And when we're getting into floor and ceiling here, The ceiling, I think that they should win the NFC South. I think they have the talent to do so. Their offense should be good enough. So 10, 11 wins here. 11 wins for any other division, like for this level of talent, would be out of the question. But because they're playing 6 games of bad teams, I think they could get there. But the floor, I think we're looking at closer to the floor I said for the Buccaneers, maybe closer to the Saints. I think one or two of those toothpicks, if Kirk doesn't do well, if the offensive line doesn't hold up like we want them to, if 2 people that they brought in on the defense can't turn that unit around, then this might not be the super touted team that they've been all offseason. So like 11 wins to 5 or 6, I think could be the range for them.
So I want to throw this out here. Do you think the Rams or the Falcons last year had more talent on defense?
Ooh, I have to go with the Rams just because
They
Aaron Donald pulled like the entire defense with him, you know?
Okay. So if they had more talent because of that one playmaker and what they could scheme around it, from an EPA standpoint, Ryan Nielsen, who comes over from Dennis Allen, like I was trying to hype Dennis Allen up and the defense that he was able to put out on the field, Ryan Nielsen had the 12th best defense in Atlanta last year with a bunch of old dudes on the offensive line and not nearly as much talent that's on the back end that Raheem Morris now has to work with. Raheem Morris last year in LA had the 20th best defense. So I think like a big concern, and we said it from the top of this segment, that the Falcons defense is not, I don't think it's there. I mean, you are really counting on Matthew Judon to be your edge presence. And I was saying this before we hopped on when the news broke. Ernest Jones didn't want to trade from Los Angeles, but they said, hey, he's on the trading block. The Titans go out and get him. And like you said, they lose Bud Dupree. They need a linebacker that can generate pressure off the edge. That's a guy that knows Raheem Morris's kind of system and scheme. He had 4.5 sacks last year. He was great in coverage. You don't go after a guy like that when you're all in based on your other moves this offseason. It's just head-scratching decisions that scream incompetence, like you said. And I would not be surprised if it ends in Fontenot getting fired and Raheem Morris immediately going on the hot seat 1 year into his tenure. I don't think this is a Frank Reich situation, but it's one of those things that the expectation is exactly like you said, that Atlanta thinks this, the general media thinks this, that this is close to a 10-win team. And if they kind of go underneath that and win 7 games again, they're picking in the top 10 again, people are going to get fired. People are going to get fired.
Yeah, I think I do think that 7-win reality, or 7 wins is more of a reality than we're giving them credit for. And by we, I mean like all football people. Yeah. I see the path where things could go wrong. Maybe I'm being a cynic because I don't like the Falcons either, kind of like with the Saints, but I just don't think everything is as perfect as we're talking about. Again, we as an NFL fan base are talking about with the Falcons, especially on that defensive side of the ball. I don't think 2 30-plus-year-olds are magically fixing a defense, which you said was 12th last year. Is that DVOA? Or
that
EPA
was just
per
EPA.
play?
That was EPA per play. I
would imagine that their DVOA and success rate are much lower than 12th, but hey, 12 that's a good number. But you also lose Ryan Nielsen, who I think is going to do good things in Jacksonville this year. Just quick note on Ernest Jones, that kind of also points to my Titans. They think they're all in movement, or they think they're competing, which we talked about last week. Or excuse me, it was last week. But yeah, ceiling and floor, I got 10-ish win ceiling, like close to that 5-win floor. How about you?
I think they have the highest ceiling out of the 3 teams that we've talked about. And I would say probably even in the division, like when you talk about true ceiling, that they have the highest. But I think they have one of the wider ranges because I could see them picking in the top 10 again. And like that is a massive caveat. Like where we talked about the Saints, yes, the bottom could fall out, but like at best they're an average team. It's like the Falcons. It's like if everything goes right, they could be right there in the hunt. And if everything kind of falls as we see it, they're probably average. And then if everything goes wrong, they're probably picking in the top 10. So it's a wide gambit.
And the main difference between those two, like we're talking about, this is the theme of the Falcons, the expectation. And it's not just from everybody else. They think that they are going to be the runaway division favorite based on the moves they made. So like it has to work out for them. Like you're saying, this could be a Terry Fontenot, you're out the door situation, but we will have to see. But now 31 teams we've done so far. we can finally get to our Carolina Panthers.
Do we want to talk about the preseason game, then the final 53? And I will say this for all our listeners. We do have Mike K coming on next week to do a completely unique Panther segment before the season kicks off, where we will touch on some of these topics. But I think it's good to kind of get our initial thoughts as things are going down in real time.
For sure. We can start with that, I guess, just because it is like the current events, so to speak. The last preseason game versus the Buffalo Bills, we finally got a win, which is nice.
We did.
Over 30 points in the preseason. I can't remember the last time that's happened. Certainly not in the last, I don't know how many, definitely not under Rule, not under Reich. So it's been a while. We can just say that. I thought the first team offense looked like efficient. They moved the ball well. I thought Bryce looked good. He was 6 of 8. His 2 incompletions, one was a throwaway. One was, you could have argued it was DPI on the end zone fade to Deontay Johnson. Let's just, I'm looking at you, Dave Canales. Don't ever run the end zone fade. It's just a bad play unless you have Julio Jones there or something. But they moved the ball well. Bryce hit a bunch of different targets, including Jordan Matthews, Jatavion Sanders. Both of those guys looked good. He hit Deontay Johnson on a nice scramble. He hit Mingo for a shorter route, and Adam Thielen as well on a nice concept where we got the offense moving left and the defense followed, and Thielen kind of cut back to the right to get some extra stuff there. I think
sat right there in the zone, which was really,
right.
That was a really good design. I enjoyed that.
I think my main takeaway is, and Canales said that this would be vanilla. I know we all shudder at that word, but Canales' vanilla schemes are maybe not more advanced, but more successful than Reich's like in-season stuff. Reich never had like the quarterback moving the line, or the team moving one way and coming back another. No motion ever under Frank Reich, and we switched up the personnel quite a bit when the first team offense was on the field. We talked about all the people who had catches. Chuba Hubbard ran the ball a couple times. Xavier Legette was also out there, so they were switching up the actual players. I was quite satisfied with everything I saw from the first team offense, and the backup offense I thought did well down the stretch as well. Jack Plummer had a nice play to Jalen Coker, who made the 53, the undrafted guy out of Holy Cross. So that's something to talk about as well. But I was quite satisfied overall. I thought the defense was iffy, but the defense also didn't play their starting edge rushers, the starting corners, and Xavier Woods, I believe, didn't play. So it was a bit of mix and match on the defense, but overall I came away happy. And I haven't said that about a preseason game in forever.
There's a lot to be excited about. And that 12-play drive to kick it off was great. There's a couple things that I want to do that kind of temper expectations. And that is that we did play the Bills backups. Mm-hmm. And so that is one thing to consider. Sean McDermott. And just like you kind of pointed out, Canales running more vanilla schemes and just play calling. That's by design. Bruce right. Nolan, one of our guests, you got to listen to his Bruce exclusive podcast. It is phenomenal. He drops nuggets of wisdom that you would not really think about. And one of the nuggets he was dropping was, in essence, like you have these situations where you want to test players that you want on the roster, and you want to almost put them in a bad situation. You don't want to necessarily use motion or some of these gimmicks. You want to see, how is this wide receiver going to get open? Will the quarterback find the open receiver? And really kind of put it to the test. Now, we did see some of that creativity, like you pointed out, and I love that. One thing that concerns me about the play calling so far, and we saw it when we went to training camp, we've seen it already in preseason, and we saw it a lot in this game against the Bills. Those first 12 plays, every single snap came out of shotgun. And that is a little bit concerning, not having an under center game. And I wonder if that is going to be an element, or if we're going to try to do what the Bengals did a couple years ago when Joe Burrow operated really well out of shotgun, and they just kind of built the offense out of that formation. And you can definitely do it. They were creative with it, but it is concerning for me because I think it kind of like impacts the running game. You don't have a running back with a full head of steam. It gives a linebacker to kind of come straight down the path and make a play. And that is concerning for me in terms of a disguise and just showing your hand to the defense. So I don't know if there was anything else that you caught. We only got into 2 third down situations when we did run the ball with Chuba Hubbard that drive. He averaged 5 yards per carry. So clearly it was effective. But again, playing against backups. So some of this expectation has to be mitigated. But when we saw 11 personnel ran almost exclusively last preseason, I think the shotgun tendency is what's going to carry over to the regular season.
Yeah, I think, and we do need to temper our expectations, as you say. I think when you compare this to last preseason, you just can't help but be excited, right? When
Yep.
we looked at last preseason, and Bryce and the starters played in every single game, or at least the
Mhm.
first, it was every game because versus the Lions, they had the score. Every time they took the field, the O line was just getting destroyed by D
Yep.
lines. Ton of sacks, even in the preseason for Bryce. He had one here, but it was really he got back to the line of scrimmage after avoiding like 4 sacks. So a bit of growth from him there. Granted, the
I
starting
would have liked
center
to
and
see
left
him
guard didn't
throw
play.
it at the feet of the running back on his right real
Yeah,
quick when he realized. But those are the learning things. You got to get
right.
some of this out of your
And,
system.
and not a negative play. He got back to the
Yep.
line of scrimmage. So you take what you can get there. I just do think that what we were able to see, and I do think the shotgun stuff should be maybe addressed, maybe thought out more in the regular season. Maybe it is like you're saying, hey, we just want to line up our guy and have our guys just go run routes. When we get to the regular season, we'll operate some of the play action from under center. We'll operate from the pistol maybe a little bit more. Hopefully that's something we'll see. That I think that was a good note that you brought up there. But I think just
We
coming
only
away from
had like
this,
I think it was
there's a,
when our backup quarterback came in, and it was Jake Plummer. He had, I believe it was like 4 dropbacks under center to finish out the like first half. So again, like this offense was running almost exclusively in shotgun, and it's just something to watch and keep an eye out for as we head into the regular season.
and I will say, Canales called the first half of the game, and Brad Idzik called the second half, which was it was interesting to see how they differed in their maybe in their sequencing and stuff like that. Overall, I'm fine with how the preseason went. I think the more of the pertinent stuff is the 53 was finally finalized. I guess the initial 53 we can say. Some of the surprise cuts, and I don't know if it's a surprise to you. It is to me. Jordan Matthews was cut, but I think they'll re-sign him to the practice squad. They kept quite a few undrafted free agents. Andrew Rame, the center we talked about, that actually started the game for Bryce during the last preseason outing, kept him undrafted center. Jalen Coker, who we mentioned, the undrafted rookie receiver, and Damani Richardson, who made a ton of plays in training camp, is an undrafted safety out of Texas A&M, I believe, either them or Mississippi State. Both like Crimson, or not Crimson, like Burgundy SEC schools. I get their players mixed up sometimes, but a lot of guys there. 7 D linemen and 10 O linemen and 7 receivers. So I would expect when we make our waiver claims, which should be processed noon tomorrow, because we have the first waiver claim throughout the first couple weeks of the season. I would think that one of those position groups might get a bit thinner because we need edge rusher still, only 4 guys on the first 53, and I think another running back or tight end as well.
Yeah, we put Barno, I believe it was on the PUP list. DJ Wanham's also on the PUP list. So those 2 guys are going to add some stability when they come back from injury to the edge room. Like you said, a lot of defensive linemen. I was shocked to see, like you said, Jordan Matthews gone. I thought he would make the final 53. I thought we would rock with kind of 4 tight ends while we were waiting for some guys to come back healthy. I will say, seeing some of the motions he was deployed on, Tommy Tremble, I think, is more than capable enough to do that. JT Sanders as well. I think what would be nice is Tommy Tremble motioning, especially out of shotgun. He is a lead blocker I would want for either Chuba or Jonathan Brooks getting the ball. And that's just something to kind of keep in mind, and having an advantage in numbers and maybe playing like nickel packages, but only rolling out 11 personnel when you have a bigger guy like Mingo, Leggett, Tommy Tremble out there kind of leading the way as a lead blocker.
Yeah, for sure. I was going to show the 53 here on Joseph Hefner's website, but it reset, so I'm deleting some of the names that were there. But yeah, I want to see more of, like you're talking about, a lot of the motions, and I think guys like Amir Smith-Marset, who's currently on the roster, guys like Mingo, and even Leggett, who are able to get out in space quickly, and a guy like Leggett or Mingo, who's big and physical, that can like knock down one of those nickel corners, one of the corners that come to tackle him. I'd like to see more of that. We talked about how during the the Packers game, we saw a lot of that when Thomas Brown was calling plays with Amir Smith-Marset. I want to see more of that kind of stuff, right? David Moore also made the initial 53. He's a holdover. I know you have stuff to say about this.
I don't know about that one. I don't know about that one.
He's a holdover from, not a holdover, but he worked with Canales. He worked with Canales in Seattle and Tampa Bay. So he has experience. He's a special teamer. He actually returned, or he was one of the returners on the kickoffs for the Buffalo Bills game. With the new kickoff rule, you have your guys line up and have 2 returners in the back. He was one of those guys in that game. So he might end up making the 53. I have the 53 here now. This is the initial group of guys here. Some of the guys are on the PUP list on IR, like you talked about. DJ Wanham's there. Jonathan Brooks is there. So Dane Jackson, I believe, is on IR as well. So some of the names that are missing from here, they're still on the team. We didn't cut them. They're just not on the active roster right now. I think we'll have practice squads figured out by tomorrow. I'm not sure on that one, but it was an eventful day to be sure. I'm quite surprised they kept 10 O-linemen. But I'm cool with it now because there is going to be movement. But yeah, David Moore, I think, is your big gripe with this group so far.
If you're going to keep 7 wide receivers, I've never understood the hype about David Moore. And I'm saying back to his Seattle days. I was so pissed off in 2018 when we were on a losing streak. We hosted the Seahawks. We had a lead. We were playing good. Cam's shoulder is banged up. But you know who we have covering wide receivers on the outside? Mother bleeping Corn Elder. And I hate that guy. Hate him with a passion because this guy had the opportunity to turn around and make an interception and end the game on a 4th down play. And David Moore just goes up and mosses the dude on a 4th down play that ends up winning them the game. So I don't like David Moore for that reason. I think he's slow. I don't think he can get separation. And if we look at what Terrace Marshall has done in training camps, I get it. He's always been the training camp darling and then doesn't perform in the regular season. But I think he would offer more to this offense than David Moore would. And I think this is just about a favoritism to a guy who knows the scheme, is a professional athlete, all that yada, yada nonsense. I don't understand it. I don't. I really don't. I personally would have kept Jordan Matthews over David Moore. But again, the coaching staff sees something that I don't.
And an important point is that Jordan Matthews is a vested veteran. He's been in the league, I think, 11 years now. So I think he's an immediate candidate to go to the practice squad. I would be shocked if he doesn't after the showing he's had in training camp. He performed well in the Bills game. He caught the touchdown from Bryce. So I'd be shocked there. You brought up, I think, or you think Terrace Marshall adds more to the offense than David Moore. I think this is a teams guy. I think David Moore adds more to the special teams. That's why he's currently on the 53. We'll have to see. But yeah, once some of these waiver claims come in, and there were some good players released by teams today, I wouldn't be shocked to see David Moore not on the 53. But that's neither here nor there. We need to get to what the Panthers did this offseason.
Yeah. We've kind of highlighted it already. Dave Canales gets brought in from Tampa. He brings Brad Idzik. He brings the offensive line coach. And now I've brought him up as the offensive line coach. Moving forward, I will try to remember his name. They obviously realized that the interior offensive line was the big issue last year in Carolina. They signed Robert Hunt from Miami. They signed Damian Lewis from Seattle. The two aren't really known for their pass protection as much as run blocking. And this, to me, shows exactly what Dave Canales did in Tampa Bay. Let's run the ball and run it a lot. And so I think him bolstering the interior offensive line, we already had Taylor Moton and Ike Ekwonu, who are really good run blockers. I think the plan is to lean on Chuba Hubbard and Jonathan Brooks this year. And Jonathan Brooks obviously has 4 games until he can come back. But if he's able to kind of get up to 100% around halfway through the season, I think that's a great 1-2 punch to have in your backfield. We trade for Deontay Johnson, sending Dante Jackson and a pick swap. That really kind of highlights a lot of the big moves. We also picked up Josie Jewell, a linebacker from Denver, so he reunites with Ejiro Evero. We pick up DJ Wanham, Jadeveon Clowney, Ashawn Robinson, a couple guys on that interior. And then I think, talked about it last week for Michael Jackson from Seattle, sending our 7th round linebacker, Michael Barrett, I believe, that was from Michigan to Seattle. So Mike McDonald loves his linebackers, traded a corner for that guy. So we'll see if he amounts to anything out there. But that's really sums up kind of what we did this offseason outside of the draft. Do you have anything you want to add outside of what we discussed many, many months ago when the draft actually went down?
Outside of the draft or in the draft or just in general?
In general. I mean, the Leggett pick, I loosely brought up Brooks, but yeah.
Yeah, so from what we've seen so far in training camp in the preseason, obviously Jonathan Brooks isn't 100% yet. Hopefully we get him like halfway through the season like you're talking about. Xavier Legette has been dealing with a couple injuries there. But what I've really liked so far is Jatavion Sanders, who we're showing Jonathan Brooks highlights, but if you see number 0, like on that block right there, that's also Jatavion Sanders, the Texas tight end. I've really liked what he's done in the preseason. I've loved what Trevin Wallace has done in training camp. I think he's going to be like the Shaq replacement next season. This season, I think he'll have an active role as well. I like those two signings or draft picks there, excuse me. And if Legette and Brooks can be healthy for us, I think that's going to be huge. These are guys that have speed, playmaking ability, something no Panther had last year. So really happy there. The Deontay Johnson trade, to me, we talked about it at the time. I still don't understand quite how we were able to do that. I know he might not have fit with the culture, the locker room of the Pittsburgh Steelers, but I mean, if you look at the Steelers receiver room now, they certainly could use a guy like that. He had made the really good scramble drill play with Bryce this past Saturday versus the Bills. So I'm excited to see what he can do there. And then I really like all the defensive additions, right? This was a complete defensive overhaul. We traded Brian Burns, to the Giants. We traded Dante Jackson to the Steelers. We lost Frankie Louvu and Jeremy Chin, both to Washington. So a lot of starters gone, a lot of snaps that need to be replaced. Bring in Jadeveon Clowney, who you can say how old he is, was better than Burns last year.
From a sack standpoint. And
from everything. He had a higher pressure rate. He was 11th in pressures last year.
Yeah, he was huge. Good, but how much of that was simulated by Mike McDonald? Like that's what you have to understand.
But he's also a phenomenal run defender, much, much better than Burns is.
I will give that. Clowney is phenomenal in the run game. That was something that Burns lacked in his game.
He had a ton in his pass rush bag as well. A'Shawn Robinson, really stout run defender from the Giants. Then we bring in some, I think, stopgap pieces along the back end, like we're talking about. Dane Jackson from the Bills, Jordan Fuller, who was with Evero with the Rams, and then traded for Michael Jackson, like you talked about. So that back end, I don't think it's the strength, but I think this front that we have now, and I believe we talked about this a couple months ago when all these players were getting added. We were not good at stopping the run last year. And Evero's scheme, and Canales has pointed this out in press conferences, they want to force you to run the ball because we've talked about this before. Evero's scheme is more about prevention than disruption, right? He drops 7 a lot. They do a good job of keeping things in front of him. They kept guys like C.J. Stroud, Dak Prescott, Kirk Cousins to season lows in passing in terms of yardage. They're good at doing that. And when you have a group now that can stop the run between Derek Brown, who is the all-time single-season tackles leader now for a defensive lineman, A'Shawn Robinson, in a season, I think I said that. A'Shawn Robinson, Shai Tuttle, who's a big nose tackle, and then Jadeveon Clowney at one of your edge spots, and DJ Johnson, who is a guy who was drafted to set the edge. Hopefully he comes along a bit in year 2. I think you have a good front now that's going to be able to stop the run and let some of those guys make plays along the back end, like J.C. Horn if he's healthy, like Shaq Thompson, who's back now, Josie Jewell, who had a ton of tackles in Denver. I think we're going to see an improved defense, which is something we need. We were at like 5th or something in total defense, which is just yards allowed. That's not a good metric. We need to improve in success rate, red zone, third down, all that kind of stuff. I think it starts up front, and I love what they did with that front there.
Yeah. I think they've really built this defense into the image Evero wants. Mm-hmm. My issue is if you can't get after the quarterback and you go up against some of these elite quarterbacks, because we do play Mahomes this year, we do play a couple other top caliber guys, that when you go up against them, are they just going to be able to slice and dice you because they know how to break down the coverage? Those 7 guys on the back end, even though they have a numbers advantage, aren't going to be able to cover every blade of grass on the field. So you pulled it up here. We play Justin Herbert week 2. We play Joe Burrow week 4. Caleb Williams could be very exciting come week 5. And then you get down to, obviously, the Mahomes matchup. We'll play Jalen Hurts, Dak Prescott, Kyler Murray even. And so some of those quarterbacks are able to create offense. And so for me, I don't see the playmakers necessarily that we had, because Brian Burns and Frankie Louvu, to be very honest with you, were probably 2 of our top 3 defenders last year outside of Derek Brown. They were that good. J.C. Horn, you can maybe put in that conversation, but again, he's struggled to stay healthy. So It's one of those things that I feel like we have depth on the back end. I think we have an identity in terms of what our defensive line is going to do, but I don't see anybody outside of Clowney really that's going to be able to generate pressure and get after the quarterback. And that for me is a concern when that is the element of the game that we're going to have to play against some of these premier quarterbacks.
For sure. Just looking at, I think our early season isn't super bad, but this gauntlet down the stretch of like Chiefs, the Bucs just won the division, Hurts and the Eagles, the Cowboys and the Cardinals. I'm quite high on the Cardinals this year. That's going to be that's going to separate the men from the boys, so to speak. And I think when we're talking about the defense in terms of not going to be able to generate pressure, get after the quarterback, we couldn't do that last year either. And I think when we're able to at least solidify the defense versus the run, I think they are going to take a step forward despite losing some of the stronger playmakers in Burns and Luvu. That being said, I think all the excitement should be on the offensive side of the ball. Totally revamped, like we're talking about. The entire offensive staff is new. Dave Canales brought in his people, so it's not a meshing of the minds, so to speak, like it was last year, or too many voices in somebody's ear. We're not going to have the situation last year where Frank Reich and Thomas Brown argued over the playbook during the offseason, which was reported like them resetting the playbook 3 different times. We're not going to have that issue this year. We're going to have cohesion. We're going to have a one vision for the offense. And if it's good, if it's bad, at least we have that identity. And then all the playmakers we brought in, like we've talked about, are certainly upgrades over what we had last year. Even if you go by position, the interior of the offensive line should be much stronger in terms of run blocking. And then from that, I think you'll get the strength in the pass game, like on play action, stuff like that. The receiving core. Last year you had Adam Thielen. Now you have Deontay Johnson, who's better. You have year 2 of Mingo, who should be a lot better. I expect Mingo to start early in the season before Leggett takes over like halfway through in that role. And then Thielen as your third guy compared to, like DJ Chark. Thielen is much better than that. So yeah. There should be improvement across the board.
And what this does, and I don't want to take away from what you're saying, but like this is what happened when the Bills went after Stephon Diggs. You get a number one guy that's taking away the number one coverage, or they're rolling coverage to that guy's side. That's only going to open up the field more for guys like Mingo trying to take a step in year 2, or Thielen to just be the consistent playmaker he is in terms of moving the chains. So I absolutely agree that Deontay Johnson is going to add a layer to this offense that is going to help it take a step.
For sure. It's all about like when you add that one guy, it pushes everybody else down a rung or down a tier on the ladder. And just adding that one guy would be enough, but we added quite a few, I think, from him. And then the new tight ends and our tight end and Jatavian Sanders upgraded the running game once Brooks is back. I don't want to think that this offense is going to be like top 10 or anything because they were 31st last year.
What are the expectations? What should be the expectations?
And I'll say that now. This offense should be above like the bottom quarter. Like 24 and up, I think should be what it is, because I still don't think that we're
and up.
Yeah,
really?
Like that's top 75%, right? 25 and up, I guess. Like we're getting splitting hairs there, but like when we're looking at what this team was last year, it was probably the second or third worst O-line. I think the Patriots could contend for that as well. Definitely the worst or second worst receiving core. The Patriots could also contend for that. They're in a rough spot just like we were, and nothing seemed to like come together. The coaching staff and the play calling was horrendous. We've talked at length about how Frank Reich's ancient way of thinking and not switching out players, not switching out concepts, slowed the offense down. Like you could see how good the offense was operating early in the season. And then it just all fell apart. Bryce couldn't trust the receivers anymore. He couldn't trust himself. The receivers got open less. The offensive line caved in more. I think with the some of the guys that started being depth now, I think that there's less a chance of that happening. And Bryce and the entire offense needs to take a step forward. We need to see that Bryce is an NFL QB. That's what the expectation is for me. And for that to happen, the offense needs to be not in the 30s anymore. It needs to be in the upper 20s, maybe even approaching that halfway mark around the league. I still don't think this is a top half of the league offensive line. I still think this is a bottom probably 8 to 10 receiving core. But when we're making everything, like when there's improvements across the board in the 3 Ps, like we're talking about protection, playmaker, play calling, I think when that all comes together, this offense can be in that 16 to 22 mark or something like that. And I think that one third quartile, I guess is how I would put it, that should be where the expectation is.
Where you ended right there, 16 to 22, that's going to be the expectation. I feel
I
like
said 16 to 24, the third quartile. Yeah.
Well, and I think when you start approaching 24, 25, that's not a big enough jump, because I understand that your takeaways on the offensive line, at least from a pass protection standpoint, aren't great. This is one of the most expensive offensive lines in football. It has to work. And
that's
the
true.
Playmakers you add on the perimeter, they're going to have to stay healthy and improve. Xavier Legette, because you have Mingo taking a step in year 2, doesn't have to be a day one starter, but we need to see growth from him. We need to see Jatavion Sanders and Jonathan Brooks making plays. And we need to see that, because that's how we're going to evaluate Bryce Young, who I think, if he's going to warrant being the starter and going, hey, I'm a guy that can take you to the playoffs. Last year was truly just abysmal. It was a rookie season. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't have people around me to help me kind of decipher what was going on. That's not the excuse this year. And if he can't be in that 16 to 20 range as a quarterback, then how can you justify continuing the build around him? Because, again, we have one of the most expensive offensive lines. We did go out and trade for Deontay Johnson. We used the first-round pick on a wide receiver, and then we used additional picks on offensive skill positions. So there is really no excuse to, I think, really be pushing that 16 to 20 mark. And if you start hovering around the 24 to 26 range throughout the season, I think it's a failure.
I think when you look at this team, and obviously paying money doesn't necessarily mean like getting the best players. We had to pay the premium for those players because we were 2-15. I think when you look at it with all these pieces coming together, I don't think the expectation is going to be like super like immediate jump to top half or anything like that. But like we're talking about, that 16 to 20, 22 range, that's where I want it to end up by the end of the season. It might take some time, right? Because this is a new play caller, a new system, all that kind of stuff, new playmakers, who some of them like Brooks aren't super healthy at the moment, but we do need to see growth there. If we see Bryce not trusting his receivers or not being able to throw with anticipation like it was towards the end of last year.
Sacks this year, like stuff like that, where he can mitigate it by just getting the ball out of his hand. And I know you talked about him kind of navigating the pocket, only taking a 0-yard sack. How about not dancing? Get the ball out of your hands so you don't have to take hits. You don't have to wear yourself out. So when you do have to scramble and make plays, you have the energy to do it and run by everybody.
And that's super fair. Everybody was like blanketed on that play. For example, And I do think an offensive line that doesn't allow, I believe it's the most pressures in PFF charting history, which was last year with the Panthers. I believe that's the case. That should go a long way. But yeah, I'm with you there. Like you're talking about with the energy for scrambling, I just learned this or recalled this the other day. Bryce led rookie QBs in rushing last year with all the scrambling he had to do. And that's taken into account some of the losses he took. Neither here nor there. The offense does need to take a jump because we know what the defense is for the most part. But if the offense can't move forward, you're right. We can't be confident about Bryce, Canales, quite frankly, or a lot of the moves they made this offseason. So we need to see that offensive jump, and that's getting into ceiling and floor. I don't think this team's going to contend for the division. I think there's just so much more strength on offense for a team like the Falcons. The Buccaneers proved it to us last year with the continuity that they have the talent to stick around that 9-win range. So I'm seeing like as our ceiling, maybe like in that 6 to 8 win range, maybe like 7 or 8 wins. Floor, I could certainly see us winning like 3 games, not making too much of a step there. But my sweet spot for us this year, where I would feel good about, is 5 to 6 wins. That's almost tripling what we got last year. And that's kind of where I see us going. If I'm going to skip ahead to the division standings, I actually think we're going to do better than the Saints. I have the Saints bottoming out, and I like getting into my perfect take because these are all like bang, bang, bang. And the Saints are going to have a top 5 pick. I just really don't see it with them. But we need to. We don't need to do better, but I expect us to in the long run. And to that point, I think it's going to go Falcons, Buccaneers, Panthers, Saints for the division.
Our initial win season total, when in Vegas was kind of dropping some lines and people started betting, the Panthers were at 4.5. And I think that was even too low. And the market has now since reflected that, and we're at 5.5. And I exactly think that's kind of where the floor is at. I think the floor is at about 5 wins.
The floor.
It's very rare. Yeah, the floor, I think, is truly 5 wins. And the reason why I say that is very few times do you see a team pick first overall and then pick first overall the next year. There is some level of improvement. There is some extra added juice. I do like what I've seen with the offense. As much as we've nagged on Reich, I think a lot of what happened last year with Reich is you had too many minds. There were 3 different attempts to install different offenses, and you didn't have cohesion. I think that's just kind of what bled into the season and led to the disaster that happened. So I think there's enough talent on both sides of the ball to really get up to that 5-6 win range. I do think this is probably the most narrowest kind of distributions. I feel like this is like a 5 to 7 win team. And if you get close to that 7, I feel a lot more optimistic about the season. We end up in that 5 win spot. If we aren't competitive in a lot of games, that 5 wins is going to suck because it's going to feel like last year where we're not competitive. Nothing's really changed. We're the same old Panthers. And that is something that we have to change in this culture. That's something that the general manager, Dan Morgan, and the head coach, Dave Canales, have preached on. And so I hope from a culture standpoint, that shifts and we're back in it. We're playing competitive football and we're giving something to fans to cheer for. So that's my hope for the Panthers. That's kind of the range of outcomes in terms of standings. I'm the opposite in terms of the team that I see bottoming out. I think the Buccaneers repeat as division winning the division. And the reason why is because of what they've done on offense. I think if Todd Bowles can just keep that defense just churning out a little bit of production and being able to kind of fill in the losses that you had with Devin White and Shaq Barrett, they have an interior defensive line that will, I think, allow them to stop the run and maybe use some exotic blitzes to generate pressure. So I think that's the team that wins it. The team that I think is right there second, that I really do think is just going to be another 500 team, even though you think they are going to pick in the top 5, is the New Orleans Saints. I think they finished second. Whether it's a combination of Derek Carr or Spencer Rattler, this is a team that I think can churn out 7 to 8 wins. I don't think they're going to win the division, though. Team at third, I'm right there with you. I have the Carolina Panthers. So that means a team that has gone all in this offseason, I have at the bottom of the division. And the reason why goes back to the point I made about Kirk Cousins. Who have we seen change teams this late in their career and do something with the new team? And then from a rookie quarterback standpoint, if you go, okay, Kirk Cousins isn't the answer, they have Michael Penix. Name me a rookie quarterback that came in that old and was successful. Brandon Weeden? No, he sucked for the Browns. But that's what when you talk about a lot of the different pieces, it looks good on paper. I don't think it's going to play out. There's a reason why Justin Simmons was a free agent all offseason. Yes. Was he an all-pro safety several years ago? Absolutely. Can he still play at probably a high level? Probably. Matt Judon, same thing, but he's coming off an injury. You're expecting production off a couple of guys that have not played a single snap for you, and you've only gotten older on defense with David Onyemata and Grady Jarrett and some of the other pieces you have there. I'm just not sold on this team, especially since they've already lost Rondale Moore, who's going to be a huge part of that 11 personnel. Their wide receiving core outside of Drake London honestly sucks. It really does. And this is where it comes back to, there's a lot of big names. There's a lot of media hype. This was the case with the Falcons last year with Desmond Ridder, and it did not go well. And I don't see it going well this year.
I don't want to, compare Kirk and Penix. We don't know what Penix is yet.
I'm saying Kirk Cousins to Russell Wilson, to Deshaun Watson, to Aaron Rodgers with the Jets. How fast did that? 3 snaps? That's what I'm saying. It's when a quarterback changes teams like that, it doesn't work. Matthew Stafford is the only success story.
I mean, the big one is Tom Brady, if we want to talk about that, because he was
the GOAT. But he was the GOAT already. Kirk Cousins isn't the GOAT. What has Kirk Cousins won? Not an MVP, not a Super Bowl.
Maybe MVP at some point. I'm not sure. Might have been Hemmer Trubisky or something, but I can see like we're talking about with both the Saints and the Falcons, who we had as the bottom teams respectively. Once we pull the toothpick out, the bottom is there. I think they have the potential to bottom out the most out of every team in this division. Those 2 teams, I think their floors are the lowest. Maybe not the Falcons, but I think their floors are the lowest compared to the Bucs and even us or the Panthers, because we added so much this offseason that if we win 2 games again, or even 3 games, I will be absolutely shocked. That would just blow my mind. You talked about the last time teams have gone back to back with 1. It was the the Jags, who had Urban Meyer as Trevor Lawrence's coach, like maybe the only worse coach in recent memory than Matt Rule, like just awful.
Yep.
And then
college
it was
coaches, man, they can't make the transition.
Right. It was the Browns who the first time they had the first pick picked an edge rusher. So not like, and granted, Myles Garrett's great, but you need your QB, right? And then they got number one again after going 0-16 and got Baker Mayfield. So it's not, or it's quite uncommon that we'll say that we get 2 number 1 picks back to back. At least we'll get it this year if we do end up with the first pick. But there's a lot of disaster potential in this division, and that's what makes it so fun for me. It's like, besides the fact that we're Panthers fans, this is the Panthers pod, there's just so much that could go wrong. And for 3 teams, maybe 2, because maybe the Buccaneers do have expectations to win it all again. There's no expectations for the Panthers. The Saints shouldn't have expectations. If they do, they need to take a look in the mirror. And then it's the Falcons' expectations that make this so tantalizing. And Falcons fans this offseason have been gassing it up. So I can't help but root for them to fail like you're doing. So it's going to be super interesting.
It seems like the perfect storm, because we saw a couple years ago, Broncos traded for Russell Wilson. They had all the pieces around them. They ended up with the top 10 pick, top 5 pick. And that's kind of where your pick is, that the Saints do that. And for me, the reason why I'm hesitant on the Saints is because while on the surface, on paper, it looks like the Saints are going to just like completely run themselves into the ground. We thought that about the Rams and the Buccaneers last year.
That's true.
Both of those teams exceeded expectations. Why I do not think the Saints are going to be in the playoffs like those 2 teams were. That is where I think that they have a little bit more of a floor, because there is continuity. This is a new coaching staff, and Raheem Morris has not been successful as a head coach. So you pair that with the fact that you have a lot of just unknowns with this roster, it is hard to bet on them, and that's why I see them kind of imploding. So your perfect take was the Saints pick in the top 5. Mine is that the Falcons will pick again in the top 10, because Terry Fontenot said they weren't going to be in that position again. So I think that's just how we see the NFC South breaking down. Next week, we have our big final season preview, if you'll call it that, where we will break down our predictions, both records for every team, our X factors. We'll have a couple bets, because betting's legal in North Carolina. So we'll have a couple good ones for you guys. We'll keep up with our records throughout the year, see who does better, either myself or Jacob. And at some point next week, it will be a completely separate pod. Maybe we'll conjoin them just to make it easier on you guys. We will have that 30 to 45-minute segment with Mike K, just breaking down the Panthers more in depth, doing a lot of what we did in probably the last 40 minutes talking about this team and in preparation of the Saints game on week 1. So until then, we will catch you guys next week.